everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of the Future of Data Security. Today, I'm speaking with Nic Chavez, CISO Data and AI at IBM. Nic, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Nic, I was reading your background, and you've definitely been around the block. You've been in and out of the IBM family. You just joined back. You've worked in Defense, Accenture, KKR, AWS. Can you give us a brief overview of your background and what's the most exciting thing you're working on today?
Sure. Yeah. This is actually my third time back at IBM. I started with the Gifted and Talented program in my high school just as a contractor in Boulder, Colorado, when before it was the Lexmark printer office. But the point is that I've loved IBM for 30 years and happy to be back. I'm back via acquisition. IBM purchased Datastax this year in late May is when the deal closed. And so yeah, since the first time to the third time I've been at Accenture and KKR and have done some work with the Department of Defense. As far as what we're working on right now, Watson X.data is where Datastax products ended up. And so basically it's a vectorized database that's based on open source Cassandra that's mixed with something called Langflow, which is a drag and drop agentic builder for MCP. So that's Watson X.data and Watson X.orchestrate. And those two things together make it pretty easy for people to deploy enterprise AI in a secure way.
Very exciting. And it seems, I've met a lot of people, they leave a company, then the long arm of the M&A acquisition brings them back one way or another. You oversee, obviously, security and programs through IBM for some of the largest government and enterprise accounts. What is keeping up your clients at night, the CISOs, the CIOs, or maybe things they're not thinking about yet?
What I've found with my reference group inside the World Economic Forum, so I belong to a group of other CISOs of some of the largest companies in the world. And I think everybody is really just thinking about how to best serve their internal customer. And by that, I mean, the CEO or COO is like gung ho. They're like, let's deploy AI 100%. 110%. Let's put it everywhere we possibly can. Let's put it a couple places where we probably shouldn't. And so the CISO group, or I guess the CISO ecosystem, is very much trying to be as responsive as possible, and in a lot of ways trying to be proactive when working with the CIO population in order to deploy a working, secure feature set where enterprise AI can be deployed inside of the walls. And so the way that I make it simple for people is I tell people that, like, hey, if you're a parent and you have some teenage kids, you try to do everything you can to make your house the cool house to hang out at. So that way they're not out doing crazy stuff in other places. And so that's, I think, what CISOs and CIOs are trying to do with enterprise AI is they're trying to deploy the very best tools inside of the walls of the organization or the enterprise in order to keep their employees and their employers' data inside of those four walls. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity that we as CISOs and CIOs have today.
And what role does the World Economic Forum play with the CISO group and the AI governance program? Is it involved in some standards, or it's more about aligning different stakeholders? Can you share more on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really what the World Economic Forum does is it's almost a tertiary type of organization where it will bring enterprise CISOs and CISOs from government, and also CISOs or rule creators from standards bodies, so NIST and ISO and the like, in order to have a conversation that is thorough and is effectively the basis of a lot of the decisions that come out with regard to AI and security. I think that the promiscuity of thought is very important when it comes from that type of environment and that type of group. They always employ something called Chatham House rule, which, for those who are unfamiliar, basically is we can write down anything anyone says, but we cannot attribute it to the person who says it. And so that brings with it a very free flowing environment for different ideas to where people can basically say, hey, look, that's a great idea. Or like, well, this might be a very bad idea and it can't be attributed to that person or to the enterprise for whom they work. And so it's a pretty important function that World Economic Forum plays. They do it for a lot of different areas other than AI and security and technology. And so that's effectively what it is. And we're all very grateful for it.
Without attributing anything to anyone, as you said, can you share a moment or an anecdote when you realized that, okay, AI security is going to need a fundamentally different approach for data protection? And I heard all kinds of stories, all the way from, the payroll list getting ingested in a model. Now people are seeing what others are earning. They want raises, all the way to M&A leaks. But I'm curious if you have kind of a oh my god moment you could share.
Yeah. So there is a startup that is working to combat deepfakes. And so the VC reached out to me and basically said, hey, look, would you have a discussion with this person? And I said, yeah, I'd be happy to. In the course of my career, I've been a founder. I've taken a company public. We've sold a couple. And so I have a soft spot in my heart for founders in general. And so in speaking to them, I realized what kind of problem they were solving at scale and was able to use some of my World Economic Forum connections in order to put them in touch with the First Lady of the White House, who has an initiative to combat deepfakes. And so I think that it's that type of connection that will enable true change. And without World Economic Forum, I don't think that I would have been in a position to make that connection for the office of the First Lady in the White House and really kind of give this person a leg up for their startup in order to start solving the problem at scale.
There was a big, well publicized deep fake attack. I believe it happened in Australia, the whole fake CFO. Has there been any more advancements in combating these types of attacks?
I would say there's been an advancement of awareness for security training for this type of threat. Has there been some technological advancements? Yeah, sure. But it's whether or not they can be deployed quickly enough, right? I mean, for a handful of dollars and a handful of hours, somebody can create a deep fake of effectively anyone and then copy their voice and be able to do that kind of impersonation attack. And so are the tools there to combat it? Sure. It's whether or not the tools can be deployed at speed and with enough velocity to combat it inside of the enterprise. And quite frankly, that can sometimes come down to a sales cycle, right? How long does it take to convince someone that they need it? How long does it take somebody to convince an enterprise that they need to set aside budget for it? What does that procurement process look like? And how quickly can we get it implemented after? Whereas somebody can just make a decision, like a nefarious person or a hacker can just make a decision to target a specific company at a specific time, grab a YouTube video of the CEO or CFO, copy their voice, and just make it happen. So the velocity by which the nefarious element or the criminal element can deploy is orders of magnitude faster than what an enterprise can. And I think that that's the true risk, is that delta in delay.
It's very interesting, this whole avatar impersonation business. Like, who's to say I'm not a really clever guy and you're talking to my avatar right now? We're going to reach a point where if you don't meet someone in person, they may not even be real, right?
It's really funny that you say that. There are a bunch of AI twin startups that are coming out to where that is the business model, is to deploy yourself or myself in a video chat type of fashion to where they can achieve scale through their kind of advice by ingesting a litany of my writing or my emails for the last 12 years or something like that in order to impersonate my tonality and my cadence and the way that I form sentences and the way that I form thoughts in general. And so there have been a significant amount of deployment already. Like, for example, yesterday, I don't know if you know who Shaquille O'Neal is. He's an enormous former basketball player here in the States, but he is now, they're using his AI twin, I think, for cars, for like car sales or something like that. I have to double check, and I'll look after the podcast, and I'll send it over to you. But it's incredible, just that a we have the technology to do this, and B, that celebrities are actually allowing their profiles to be used in this way. And just yesterday, actually in California, Governor Gavin Newsom passed a law to make it illegal for a film studio to use AI to impersonate an actor. So, I mean, all of this is very much emerging from a governance perspective and a regulatory perspective. And really, it's those two things that need to catch up to the technology, because the technology is there and has been there for some time.
It's so interesting, the world of possibilities. Myself, the other day, I was kind of musing and thinking, maybe I could have an AI follow what I do day to day and sort of capture my thought process. And then you could expose that to other people. Like, what would Jean do? What would Nick do? I wonder what the future holds. Like, maybe one day you could rent a top shelf executive to do something that someone would have curated, like a mix of all the best historical figures, maybe, or something else.
It's a great thought. I've thought about that in the past in terms of there's an old book called Think and Grow Rich, and they talk about a mastermind, and they talk about like who are your favorite thinkers. And so I did a small experiment to create my own GPT about ingesting a certain amount of information from some of these leaders and to get the advice, and it really really worked well. To your point about having an AI kind of follow what you do and then be able to deploy that knowledge base and perhaps even like rent it out at scale from a consulting perspective, I do think that that is an eventuality, and I think that it's a very good one. It's something that I think is going to lend itself really well to the white collar gig economy, and I think that most people are going to in the future, and I don't know if this is in 5 years or 10, but are going to need to have a portfolio of their work that can be representative more than just like a resume. It's like, "Hey, show me what you've done," right? Show, like, have your AI do this take home project or something like that. I think that that's very much a possibility.
I was reading your LinkedIn and you said something like less than 1% of organizations have operationalized, safe and effective AI. And I feel the same way talking to many large enterprises. They seem to be unable to move beyond the pilot. Often, some of the risks that are cited are data loss through prompts, file uploads, unfettered continuous access to data by AI models. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. There could be safe adoption or there could be ad hoc, whatever goes adoptions. What are you seeing as the biggest risks, and how are enterprises going to transform themselves to actually deploy and go from 1% to 100%?
So again, it goes back to giving them the right tools inside of the four walls of the enterprise, right? So that way they're not just going to chatgpt.com and, opening up a free browser and then dumping in PDFs that are corporate confidential, right? So the number one thing that we're seeing right now from a data security perspective is accidental data exfiltration, right? Which is, I mean, them taking a spreadsheet that has, payroll data, or a spreadsheet, maybe something less personal, but still incredibly important from a data protection perspective. Maybe it's, some Salesforce data, right? It's a list of customers and, what they've purchased already and what they intend to purchase in the next quarter, and then dumping that into the chat box for an LLM, whether it be Claude or DeepSeek or it's just your standard chat GPT, and basically allowing the model to be trained on that information. Because the way that the enterprise user agreement works is like, hey, look, we're going to give you chat GPT for free. And if you're not using our API, then, we're allowed to train on your data. That's sort of the trade that you're making as a consumer. And so if in the enterprise, you're allowing your employees or enabling your employees accidentally by not blocking chat.com or chatgpt.com, then you are creating a data exfil problem inside of your organization. And so that is the risk. Now, going back to the World Economic Forum study that we released last week, where 1% of enterprise AI projects are actually, getting through and being adopted. That was a really interesting and eye-opening study in that we are seeing a lot of ideation and imagination inside of the market, but the deployment of tools in kind of a non-standard or non-portfolioized way, right? Like, I mean, right now you've got hundreds of vendors knocking down the door of the CIO or the CISO or the CFO or the COO or, the chief marketing officer, and basically being like, hey, let's try this. Let's deploy it. We'll do a POC. It's going to cost you nothing or very little. And so it doesn't reflect the overall enterprise strategy that could be. Now we're starting to see more enterprise strategy around AI and secure AI coming out and then going out and finding those tools. But right now, the economy and the ecosystem for AI is very much a vendor push as opposed to a customer pull. Now, you could say that that's always the way that it's been in tech, and that, the industry doesn't know what they need until you show it to them. But I think that that's probably not fair to the incredibly smart individuals that are running industry, right? I mean, who could say that the men and the women of the Fortune 500 aren't bright enough to know that they might use AI for, right? And so where we see the most success at this moment are the enterprises that go through, create a tiger team for AI strategy, and basically say, where can we achieve the most throughput from a business perspective and return on investment from a business perspective. And then obviously, have security first in the design, right? I mean, let's do this the right way. Let's deploy it the right way. So that way we don't have to wad it up and redeploy it after we've found out that there's been a data exfil or some kind of a breach.
There's a paradox that is emerging with the AI supercycle that we're in because the AI capabilities, especially when you look at the coding agents, give you an ability to develop and integrate bespoke solutions much quicker than before. And I can speak for ourselves at Coash. We've decided to do a lot of automation projects in house instead of going out and buying specific point solutions. The reason are that it's often faster, it's more fine-tuned to what we want, and we avoid the risk of a couple of VC-backed, very expensive experiment disappearing. Are you seeing that sort of paradigm, and are you seeing some enterprise just deciding to build more in-house? And if so, why are they doing that?
So I'll share something that we did at Datastax prior to the IBM acquisition that I thought was brilliant. And it wasn't my idea, so I can say it was brilliant. It was called Project Catalyst. And what it was is they had not only the engineering team, but they basically enabled everyone in the company with a certain budget. And they were like, we don't care which copilot you pick. You can use Cursor, or you can use Lovable, or you can use whatever the development copilot might be, and build whatever you want. We just want to see what you build. And obviously, most people gravitate towards something that would be useful in their area or in their department of the company. And we came up with some really great stuff. And why is that important? It's important to show that the level of technical ability has dropped, or the necessary technical ability has dropped for people to create something from nothing. Now, were they perfect? Were they enterprise ready? Could we go and sell them as a software company? No. But, were they useful? Absolutely. And so, you have to think back in the day. I mean, I'm getting a little older now. And so, we deployed enterprise software, think of ERP, and I did that for a lot of years. And, a customer would buy something and it would be like $10 million or $50 million. And then, they would need another $14 million of customization to make it work right. And so, I think that those days are probably rapidly coming to a close, right? I think that there's going to be companies like Tesla where they were like, we were looking at deploying ERP, but then we just decided to build our own. Yeah, it's perfectly valid. They're not ever going to sell their ERP as long as it works for them, then that's fine. If you saw Anthropic just released that their Claude code worked for 30 hours straight and effectively duplicated Slack as an application. I mean, that's fairly impressive and somewhat directional as to where the market is going. So I do think that, and you brought up a very good point about, running the risk of a VC backed entity just disappearing and then you having made some important bets on the continuity of that company. But I do believe that vibe coding for non-technical professionals will become standard, and that there will be necessarily a security and engineering review that happens throughout the course of that. Like kind of your standard CI/CD pipeline, but warm and fuzzy for somebody who might work in HR that built something, right?
There's another trend that I'm observing, and we're involved right in the middle of it, is that, a lot of solutions today are providing their service in a cloud-based manner. And an emerging trend is now people are using LLM as a judge to do XYZ, whether it's analyzing a file, anything cybersecurity related. That causes the barrier to entry to become extremely low. Would be easy for us to start any startup that has an LLM in the back end doing something. And that ability, that capability will only get better across time. At the same time, now, and you're certainly familiar with that, there are on government clients that favor on premises, and we've seen also that the intelligence now is propagating back to the edge. Case in point, the Apple iPhone now has a local large language model with the associated chipset. We're seeing Dell, Intel, other companies are going to provide fully distributed language processing units. And for me, it's almost like in the past, we would write software based on the fundamental units of CPU, memory, disk. Now you could add a fourth readily available computing element, which is the intelligence you could borrow for a purpose. So, what's going to happen, in your opinion, with the traditional cloud based, and I like to call it excessive centralization of data, which in a way is very costly, has some advantages, but disadvantages, versus what seems to be emerging, which is an edge based intelligence, which probably is going to be more flexible for defense clients, going to be preferred. I'd love to hear you on that space.
So I think that the defining factor of the use case associated with that would necessarily be the freshness of data. And by that, I mean an LLM that is hosted locally versus an LLM that's hosted centrally with the primary purpose of cost reduction and the secondary purpose, depending upon who you are, of being data security is like, how often do you need to refresh the model and how are you going to refresh the model, right? I mean, if there's something, this is emerging called LLMO, which is large language model optimization. And so effectively what it is, the basis of it is we need to make sure that super intelligence is not trained on poison data. Okay. And so, what is the source of the data? If you want to use an art term, what's the provenance of the data, right? Like, I mean, who built it? Where's it coming from? How is it sent into the model? And can we trust it? Like, is it signed? Is it quantum signed? How is this actually working? And so you can do that inside of a four-walled model. It's in your data center, it's in, the basement of your headquarters, whatever the case might be. And that's wonderful. And that could work very well for, say, the laws of, the state of California, or, the federal law, or, whatever the case might be, that gets updated somewhat infrequently, right? Like 12 times a year, or, whenever Congress is in session, or whenever the legislators decide to push something through. Now, if we need to have information like just-in-time data from sports scores, right? Or if we need just-in-time data for voting purposes, or whatever the case might be, then the likelihood of the centralization of that intelligence model is less likely unless you're using just the base model as a localized instance and then inserting additional information or updated information from like a streaming format in a centralized cloud, a vector database, and then allowing that to interact with the LLM model. So depending upon the data freshness score, if you will, is like how likely it's going to be able to be stored in an edge device versus in a centralized model.
One thing I wanted to ask you along that line is concerning the models. IBM seems to stand out as one of the few companies that has really made, from the beginning, a clear commitment to the provenance of the data used to train the models and providing guarantees, whereas others have basically scraped the internet and said, well, we'll see what happens. And it's hard to say from lawsuit regulatory perspective what will happen, but so far it looks like almost a free crime. In your view, what's the real risk here of this copyright or bad provenance when using certain models? What do you think's going to happen?
It's interesting that you say the free crime. As of yesterday, it wasn't anymore, right? Anthropic just raised, I think it's their Series E, and it was $13 billion, and they're going to have to spend 1.5 billion to settle the copyright issues, right? So think about that. It's more than 10% of their Series raise just going to the copyright issue. And so I believe that legislators they're catching up and the regulators are catching up. And so I do believe that it's very important for model labs going forward to source data in an appropriate way. And, we wouldn't be where we are today if they all asked for permission instead of forgiveness, right? I mean, sometimes it takes a very bold visionary to basically say, listen, this is what needs to happen. And then, we'll paper over it later. Now, that's not the way that IBM works, of course. IBM is very much governance aware, and we do anything we can to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. And so there's a reason why my title is CISO of Data and AI. It's because that's the order of operations, right? I mean, like you can't have good AI without great data. And so we very much focus on the provenance of data and, whether or not it can be trusted for the model.
I spoke to one of the lawyers that was involved in the Anthropic transaction, and he said, Jean, if you put 100 million in there, you don't even get information rights. And I thought that was so funny.
That is funny. That is very funny. Yeah, look, it is literally the Wild West right now with regard to the frontier labs, but it wouldn't be the Wild West if it wasn't the frontier labs, right? I mean, it goes hand in hand. You can't run around asking everyone for permission all of the time if you're trying to create something brand new. Just the amount of time it will take to make people understand it, if you can't just show it to them, would be prohibitive. And so, in a lot of ways, I very much respect the founders of these frontier labs. And I look at Mark Zuckerberg as being kind of like in the middle, right? He's trying to run a frontier lab, but also from the seat of I don't know if it's $1 trillion company yet, Meta, but it's probably pretty darn close, right? And so, and I do think that that is hamstringing him a little bit because he has to think about all of those governance issues. And so, but lots of luck to him. I think that his lab and his people are incredible. He's certainly made some incredible investments with regard to creating the crack team that he's got. And, we'll also see what's happening with Ilya and Mira in their new frontier labs. I mean, they both have been equipped with multiple billions of dollars, and the good wishes of the VCs that have backed them, and some pretty solid engineers from the existing frontier labs from whence they came.
Absolutely. Do you want to make some predictions? Maybe 5 years from now, what will people wish they had done differently, or anything you can think of, really?
I would say that my number one prediction for 5 years out is that AGI will exist. I think that we're probably less than 5 years from that. I think that we're close to 2029 emergence. If you just look at the impact of the compute, and if you look at the amount of dollars that are being invested from an infrastructure perspective with regard to power, then there's no way that this doesn't occur. As long as the current trajectory just continues, it doesn't even need to advance or accelerate. We will have AGI by 2029.
It's a very exciting period. It's almost like the invention of the car in terms of technological adoption. What would be your best advice for maybe a younger version of yourself or someone that's getting started now in this incredibly exciting but fast moving era?
I would say don't buy the hype that computer scientists are going away. As good as the co-pilots are, and as capable as they can be at generating a lot of code, Mark Zuckerberg isn't putting together $100 million compensation packages for, art majors, right? I mean, like, continue the path. If you are in STEM, stay in STEM. If you are interested in AI, absolutely go as hard as you possibly can in that line of study. We're always going to need security people. As these models advance, as AGI comes to the fore, we're going to need to have conscientious individuals with good hearts and strong minds to come in and protect artificial intelligence and protect the business assets and protect the humans that are using and interacting with AGI. And so don't buy the hype that computer science and computer scientists are going away. They're going to continue to be incredibly high paid positions. They're going to be very valuable to society, and we need good people. So stay the course.
Well said. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow along with your work, do you have a blog or social media you want to share?
I as a security professional, I generally keep my socials private, but LinkedIn's a great place. I'm at the Gigachav, which is TheGigachav, just wherever socials are sold. So pretty much everywhere. Some of them are locked down, but LinkedIn's always a good bet. And I really do my best to get back to people on LinkedIn. And especially if there's something that I can do for someone's school or somebody's nonprofit, I generally try to make an effort there.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Amazing conversation. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot. Let's keep in touch. And thank you again for joining the podcast.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much.